So if you've seen some of my previous videos, you might know that I own a set of Canon FD lenses. Today I thought we would talk about them a little. What lenses do I have, how do I Cine-mod them, and how pleased am I with my purchase? So let's start there, with the lenses I own. I currently own the 24mm f2, the 35mm f2, the 50mm 1.4, and the 85mm 1.8. So just 4 lenses in the set. Perhaps a more well-rounded set would have 5 to 7 lenses, but for me, these lenses have served me very well. If you're interested in how these lenses perform, I've posted lens test videos for each of them, and I'll make sure to leave links in the description. But if I were to add another lens, that would have to be a wider option. For my style of shooting, a 24mm is often wide enough, but sometimes you will run into shooting situations and locations that require a wider option than a 24mm. And just for reference, I am basing this on the assumption of using a super 35mm sensor. If you're shooting on a large format or full frame sensor, a 24mm will be even wider. And if you're shooting on a micro four thirds without a Speedbooster or a super 16, then a 24mm won't really be wide at all. So I'm basing this on the assumption of a super 35mm sensor, the cinema standard. But let's get back to the lenses. Even when talking about the 24, 35, 50 and 85mm Canon FD lenses, you have many options. Instead of the 24mm f2, which I own, you could go for a 2.8 version instead. Or, if you have plenty of cash, the 24mm 1.4. The 50mm exists in a 1.2 version as well, and so does the 85mm. For the 35mm, however, the fastest option is the f2. But if you want to go a little bit cheaper, there is also a 2.8 version. There are also 2 versions of the Canon FD mount, the original FD and the new FD, or NFD for shorts. My lenses are all new FD, or should I say were, since they are now Canon EF, but we'll get to that soon. For the older FD lenses, there are versions with different coatings. Some lenses are marked with SC, which stands for spectra coating, and some are marked with S.S.C, super spectra coating. When the new FD came out, the marking on the lenses disappeared, but they were all coated with the S.S.C coating. So when comparing a 50mm 1.4 S.S.C and a new FD 50mm 1.4, the only real difference is the breech lock style of the original FD mount and the build quality, but the optics are the same. The 2 different types of mounts are completely interchangeable though. Both can be used on the same cameras. The difference is if you twist the breech lock to lock the lens in place, or twist the whole lens. But why would you go for older vintage glass over the newer modern options? One reason could be price. If you want to get a cheap set of lenses for cinematography, you could get a set of a 24mm 2.8, 35mm 2.8, a 50 1.4, and an 85 1.8 for roughly $600, assuming you don't want to Cine-mod them and just use a cheap dumb adapter to convert them to your camera. And in that case, the 85mm actually makes up about half of the price. So if you skip out on that one, you can get the 24, 35 and 50 for around $300. That's a great price for some quality glass if you're just starting out. Of course you don't get any autofocus, but in my opinion, unless you're vlogging, you don't want to rely on autofocus anyways. I work as a freelance first AC in the film industry, and the biggest part of my job is being a focus puller. We don't ever rely on autofocus. But let's move on to one of the biggest upsides to vintage lenses: character. The newer lenses might objectively be better lenses, in terms of sharpness, the way it handles flares, and the lack of imperfections, such as softer edges, aberrations, and so on. But cinematography and filmmaking is an art form, so it isn't always as easy as saying one lens is better than another. It depends on the desired outcome. The imperfections that come with older glass can sometimes be very desirable. It can give a little bit more character to the image, which might fit the project, or maybe it doesn't. If you're shooting a crisp commercial of a Coke bottle, then you might want a lens that is as close to perfect as possible, and provides plenty of sharpness. But for certain projects, you might want more character and a little bit of a vintage look to the footage. For me personally, I am a big fan of the look these lenses have. They have some character, but they're not soft, they still have some decent sharpness, especially if you stop down a stop or two. But I'm also aware that for certain projects, you might want something more modern. And that's one of the reasons I very, very rarely see a DP bring his or her own lenses to a shoot. They rent the lenses that fit the current project and use a wide variety of lenses. And of course, all the gear is rented by and paid for by the production. But for people that DP the occasional project or shoot their own stuff and don't really have the budget to rent, that's often not a realistic option. And I think that's where these lenses come in. You can own a set of quality lenses for not too much money. This is a set that a lot of people can afford to own without breaking the bank. Of course, the quality and functionality won't be at the same level as Area Master Primes or Zeiss Super Speeds, but you're paying pennies compared to the price tag of those lenses. And when it comes to lenses, especially vintage lenses, they won't really drop in value. So if you decide to sell them down the road, you'll probably get your money back, or even make a small profit, assuming you take good care of them. As I mentioned earlier, my lenses aren't exactly in the same condition as when I bought them. They have been Cine-modded. The term Cine-mod means transforming your lens to try and replicate the functionality of a cinema lens. Cinema lenses typically have gears for the focus, iris and zoom, if it's a zoom lens. They normally have the same front diameter across all lenses for easier use with a matte box. The aperture is declicked, meaning you can actually pull the iris during a shot without getting the annoying clicks that a typical photo lens normally has. And the industry standard mount for cinema lenses is the PL mount. I have not modded my lenses to PL, and few people actually will, since converting to PL mount also means rehousing the lens in a lot of cases, because of the difference in flange distance. And for FD, that is the case. And rehousing the lens can be a very expensive procedure, so it kind of defeats the whole purpose. And on top of that, the PL mount isn't very common amongst the low-budget cinema cameras. So the second option is the Canon EF mount. It is a far easier mount to convert to, and is very common amongst low to mid-budget cinema cameras. And even the Ariel XL has the option of using an EF mount. So all my Canon FD lenses have been converted to Canon EF. And I actually did the conversion twice, since I wasn't satisfied with the first option. But I'll tell you about both. I first decided to convert the lenses using a set of 3D printed mounts from Shapeways. At the time the seller had both plastic and metal options, but since the plastic option was so much cheaper, I decided to go with that and see how well it would work. If I was satisfied with everything, apart from the plastic, the plan was to order in metal instead and swap them out. This option is only compatible with the new FD lenses and not the original FD lenses, and that's why all my lenses are NFD. The installation meant removing the whole mount completely, as well as installing a little arm for aperture control, and then putting the new mount on instead. And for declicking the aperture, you need to remove a little metal ball that actually creates the clicks in the aperture. If you want to dampen the iris ring and make it a little bit smoother, you can put some grease on it, but I didn't do that, so I can't really make any recommendations. But for installation instructions, I'll leave a link in the description. I will warn you, however, this is not a process for the non-handy. Anything you do will be completely at your own risk. Do not attempt to replace the mount if you don't feel confident in doing so. There are ways to get it done without doing it yourself, but I'll get to that shortly. Back to the plastic mounts. At first, it was all good. The mount had a tiny bit of wiggle, but it was nothing to really be worried about. Many lenses with the EF mount have a little bit of wiggle, since it isn't a locking mount like the PL mount. But over time it got looser and looser. With every lens change, the plastic mount got shaved down a tiny bit, and at the end, it was completely unusable if you wanted to pull focus or touch the lens in any way. Any attempt at pulling focus made the whole lens move around in the mount, causing the whole image to shift. but at this time I couldn't buy the metal option from the Shapeways seller. The metal option had been removed and only plastic was available. After contacting the seller, I got a response saying that Shapeways tolerances for metal prints had gotten a bit looser and he had to remove the metal option after some buyers had reported issues. So I had a set of Canon FD lenses converted to EF, but the whole mount had so much wiggle I didn't feel comfortable using them for basically anything other than completely static shots. And that's when I found out Cine-mods was getting close to releasing a new Canon FD to EF conversion kit. A few months later, the new Cine-mod Mica brass mount was released, and I placed my order immediately. There are options for both NFD and the breech-lock FD mount. For me, the installation process was very easy, since all I had to do was swap out the plastic mount with the new Cine-mod brass version. And as you can see, no more wiggle. Cine-mod allows you to purchase a conversion kit that you can install yourself, or if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself, you can send your lenses in to Cine-mod and they'll do it for you. In that case, you can add multiple other options for modding as well, such as focus gears, new front diameters, declicked aperture, and so on. Simply letting a professional do the whole or parts of the Cine-mod for you. So that's the mount conversion and declicking of the aperture done. We still have focus gears and the front diameters to deal with. For the gears, I decided to only add one to the focus and not iris. I see two cons to adding a gear to the iris on these lenses. That would be the fact that the iris ring is more or less on the mount. It's going to be so close to the mount when mounted on a camera that it could be hard to get to it. But that's not really my main concern. The biggest reason is the fact that the f-stops on the lens are marked on the aperture ring. So when putting any gear on it, you would no longer be able to see your stop. So I simply skipped out on it. And for my needs, an iris gear is redundant anyway. For the gears, I actually 3D printed my own, and I'll try to see if I can find a tutorial and link it in the description. But other than that, you could buy focus gears made specifically for the lenses you have. There are multiple places that sell them. Cine-mod for one, followfocusgears.com, or Precisius, which leads me to my next point. Precisius is the place I got my step-up rings to 80mm outer diameter, or Cine-ready rings, as they call them. These allow all my lenses to have the same 80mm outer diameter for the use with a matte box. Or, if you want to use circular filters, they all have a 77mm inner diameter for filters. And to go with the new front diameter, I also added some nice cinema-style lens caps that fit over the front of the lens. Or Cine-ready caps, as they are called on Precisius' website. These can also be bought with custom engraving if you want that. And to top it off, they really do make the set look more cohesive, and a little bit more like cinema lenses. And isn't that what this is really all about? Front diameter rings and cinema-style lens caps can also be bought from Cine-mod, but for me, Precisius was more convenient since they are based in the EU, and I wouldn't have to pay import taxes and customs compared to Cine-mod, which is based in the US. But there you have it, that's my current vintage cinema lens set. And I say current because if I know myself, it will probably change in some way, shape or form. But that pretty much wraps it up for this video. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see some more, and I'll see you next time.